Of course, he couldn't possibly belong up here. That was the thought, unspoken but hanging as thick as the recycled cabin air, and it would cost a global corporation $500 million before the wheels of the plane even touched down. This isn't just a story about bad customer service. It's a story about what happens when prejudice writes a check that reality has to cash, with brutal, unforgiving interest. We're talking about a multimillionaire CEO, 2 flight attendants on a power trip, and a single phone call made from 35,000 feet that triggered a corporate meltdown. Stick around because the karma in this story is served colder than the complimentary champagne they refuse to pour. The first-class cabin of Aerovista Airlines Flight 815 from New York's JFK to San Francisco was a carefully curated bubble of tranquility. It smelled of warm nuts, expensive leather, and a faint floral air freshener that failed to completely mask the underlying scent of jet fuel and entitlement. For the dozen or so passengers nestled in their private pods, this was not just a means of travel, it was a 6-hour coast-to-coast reaffirmation of their status. Into this hushed sanctuary walked Marcus Thorne. He was a tall man, impeccably dressed in a custom-tailored Brioni suit the color of a midnight sky. It was subtle, the kind of expensive that didn't shout but whispered. A Patek Philippe Calatrava, a classic and understated choice, peeked from his cuff. At 42, he had a face that spoke of long hours and intense focus, but his eyes held a calm, observant intelligence. He was the founder and CEO of Nexus Innovations, a company that had revolutionized data logistics and was on the cusp of becoming a household name. To the tech world, he was a visionary. To Wall Street, he was a kingmaker. To the 2 flight attendants standing near the galley, he was a problem. Their names were Brenda and Susan. Brenda was the senior of the 2, a woman in her late 40s with a helmet of blonde hair that looked as rigid as her smile. She'd been flying for 20 years and had seen her authority shrink with every corporate merger and new customer service mandate. The first-class cabin was her last remaining fiefdom, and she guarded its gates with the ferocity of a palace guard. Susan, younger and more impressionable, floated in Brenda's orbit, echoing her opinions and amplifying her suspicions. As Marcus approached his seat, 2A, Brenda stepped forward, her hand raised in a gesture that was meant to look polite, but felt like a barrier. "Good afternoon, sir. May I see your boarding pass?" Her voice was saccharine, but her eyes did a quick, dismissive sweep of his appearance. The suit, the watch, the confident posture, it all seemed to clash with the conclusion she had already reached. Marcus offered a small, patient smile. He was used to this, the double take, the subtle challenge. It was a tedious, recurring tax on his success. He handed her the pass. "Good afternoon, Marcus Thorne, seat 2A. Brenda took the pass and stared at it for a moment too long. She exchanged a glance with Susan, a micro-expression of shared disbelief. "Just one moment, sir," she said, her tone shifting from sweet to officious. She turned to her tablet on the galley counter and began tapping at it with exaggerated purpose. "Is there an issue?" Marcus asked, his voice even. He remained standing, a pillar of calm in the aisle. "Well," Brenda began, drawing the word out, "it's just that. This seat appears to be blocked for a premium, platinum-tier passenger. There might have been a glitch in the system." She didn't look at him, focusing instead on the screen as if it held the secrets of the universe. The implication was clear. You couldn't possibly be that person. Marcus's smile didn't falter, but a coolness entered his eyes. "I assure you there's no glitch. I am a platinum-tier member. My corporate travel department, which happens to be one of your largest accounts, booked this ticket." A man in seat 2B, a portly gentleman in his 60s with a flushed face and a Wall Street Journal spread across his lap, looked up with annoyance at the holdup. He recognized Marcus instantly. He was a small-time investor who followed Nexus Innovations with the devotion of a religious zealot. He opened his mouth to say something, to perhaps bask in the reflected glory of being seated next to a titan, but Brenda spoke first. "Susan, could you double-check the manifest?" Brenda said, passing the tablet to her junior colleague. It was pure theater. Susan fumbled with the device, her brow furrowed in feigned concentration. "It does say Thorne here, Brenda," Susan mumbled, just loud enough for Marcus to hear. "But The system is sometimes slow to update on last-minute reassignments. It was a pathetic, transparent lie. Exactly, Brenda declared, seizing the opportunity. Sir, I'm terribly sorry, but there appears to have been a significant error. Our manifest shows this seat is actually assigned to another passenger who has yet to board. We see your name further back in the aircraft. In economy. The word economy was dropped like a dirty rag. It was designed to humiliate, to put him in his place. The man in 2B stared, his mouth agape. He knew for a fact that a man like Marcus Thorne wouldn't have an economy ticket unless the plane was on fire, and it was the last seat out. Marcus's patience, a resource he guarded as carefully as his company's intellectual property, began to fray. He kept his voice low and steady, a deliberate contrast to Brenda's rising pitch. I can assure you both that my seat is 2A. Perhaps you could scan the pass again, or call your gate agent. I'm quite certain of my booking. Sir, we can't hold up the boarding process, Brenda snapped, her professional veneer cracking to reveal the raw prejudice beneath. We have a very full flight today. I understand this is disappointing, but your assigned seat is 34B. We need you to move back now. We can try to sort out the confusion later and see about a refund for the difference. She said the word confusion with air quotes, a gesture of pure, unadulterated condescension. This was the moment of decision. Marcus could have escalated. He could have raised his voice, demanded to see the captain, mentioned the tens of millions of dollars his company spent with Aerovista annually. He could have pulled out his phone and shown them the booking confirmation, the receipt, his platinum status glowing on the airline's own app. But he saw the look in Brenda's eyes. It wasn't about a ticket. It was about her power, about her validation. Arguing with her would be like wrestling with a pig in the mud. You both get dirty, and the pig enjoys it. He saw the other first-class passengers watching, some with sympathy, others with a detached, morbid curiosity. He saw the man in 2B looking utterly bewildered, and in that split second, Marcus Thorne, the strategist, the CEO who saw 5 moves ahead on the corporate chessboard, made a different calculation. He decided to let them play their hand. He would let them follow this absurd, bigoted impulse to its logical, disastrous conclusion. With a slow, deliberate nod, he gave in. Very well, he said, his voice a quiet murmur that seemed to suck the air out of the cabin. If you insist. 34B, you said? Brenda's face flushed with triumph. She had won. She had stared down the man who didn't belong and put him in his place. That's correct, sir. Just follow the aisle all the way to the back. Susan can show you. That won't be necessary, Marcus said, turning his back on her. He took his carry-on, a sleek leather briefcase, from the overhead bin where he had just placed it. He didn't look at the other passengers. He simply turned and began the long walk of shame. The man in 2B, whose name was Arthur Peterson, a senior vice president at a rival tech firm who had been trying to get a meeting with Marcus for 6 months, finally found his voice. Wait, he stammered, looking at Brenda. Do you have any idea who that is? That's Marcus Thorne. Brenda just smirked. I don't care if he's the King of England. Our manifest is the law on this aircraft. Now, sir, would you care for some champagne before takeoff? Arthur Peterson stared at her, then down the aisle at the retreating figure of the man who held the future of his industry in his hands, and simply shook his head in disbelief. He had a front-row seat to the most expensive act of incompetence he had ever witnessed, and the plane hadn't even left the gate. The journey from the front of the plane to the back was a journey between worlds. Marcus Thorne walked past the spacious, reclining seats of business class, where laptops were already open and glasses were already clinking. He moved past the premium economy section, a purgatory of slightly more legroom and marginally better snacks. Then he crossed the final curtain into the heart of the aircraft. Economy. The air here was different, denser, filled with the cacophony of crying babies, loud conversations, and the plastic-on-plastic click of overhead bins being slammed shut. The lighting was harsher, the aisle narrower. It was a chaotic, cramped ecosystem, and Marcus was now a part of it. He navigated his way down the aisle, his tailored suit an anomaly in a sea of sweatpants and hoodies. He felt the eyes on him, the curious and resentful stares. Who does this guy think he is? Coming back here in a suit like that? Must have gotten kicked out of first class. The irony was not lost on him. He found row 34. It was in the last section, just before the galleys and the lavatories, where the roar of the engines was a constant companion and the seat pitch was a cruel joke. 34B was a middle seat. His seatmates were already in place. On the aisle was a young college student, a girl with headphones on and a textbook open on her lap. In the window seat was an elderly woman who was nervously clutching a rosary. They both looked at him, then at the cramped space between them, then back at him with apologetic eyes. "Excuse me," Marcus said politely. The student sighed, unplugged her headphones, and contorted herself to let him pass. Marcus squeezed into the seat, his knees immediately pressing hard against the seat in front of him. The briefcase, which had fit so easily into the cavernous first-class bin, barely wedged under his feet. He was a man accustomed to boardrooms that could host a banquet, and now he was confined to a space that felt smaller than a telephone booth. The elderly woman gave him a tentative smile. "Not much room back here, is there, dear?" "No, ma'am, there isn't," Marcus replied with a genuine warmth that surprised her. He wasn't angry. He was beyond that. He was in a state of crystalline focus. He was observing, processing, and planning. The doors of the aircraft were sealed. The safety demonstration began, the pre-recorded voices of Brenda and Susan echoing through the cabin, dripping with false cheerfulness. Up in first class, Brenda was probably feeling smug, having restored order to her perfect little world. She had no idea that she had just armed a missile and aimed it directly at the heart of her own employer. As the plane rumbled down the runway and began its powerful ascent, Marcus felt the G-force press him back into his seat. He looked out the window, past the elderly woman, at the diminishing lights of New York City. He thought about the meeting he was flying to. It wasn't just any meeting, it was the final signing ceremony for Project Nightingale. Project Nightingale was a revolutionary logistics and tracking software developed by Nexus Innovations, designed specifically for the airline industry. It promised to streamline everything from cargo handling and baggage tracking to crew scheduling and predictive maintenance, saving airlines billions in operational costs. It was the biggest deal in Nexus's history, and the launch partner, the flagship client who would get exclusive access for the first 2 years, was Aerovista Airlines. The deal was worth over $200 million in licensing fees alone, but its true value was strategic. It would cement Nexus as the undisputed leader in the field and lock its biggest competitor out of the market. The announcement of the partnership was scheduled for the next morning, an event that was expected to send Aerovista's stock soaring. The CEO of Aerovista, Robert Maxwell, was a personal acquaintance. They had shaken hands on the deal just last week. Robert had personally insisted Marcus fly Aerovista for the signing, a symbolic gesture of their new partnership. Marcus felt a bitter laugh rise in his throat, but he suppressed it. The sheer, magnificent stupidity of it all was almost poetic. Brenda and Susan, in their quest to enforce a non-existent social hierarchy, were about to torpedo the single biggest deal in their company's history. He settled back as the plane reached cruising altitude. The seatbelt sign pinged off. He reached into his suit jacket, passed the fine Italian wool, and retrieved his satellite-enabled smartphone. It was a specialized device cleared for in-flight use for precisely this kind of situation, when a decision couldn't wait. He scrolled through his contacts, his thumb hovering over a name, Cynthia Rowe, Chief Counsel. He didn't need to make a scene. He didn't need to yell. Vengeance, he knew, was a dish best served cold. But the best deals, he mused, were best killed while they were still hot. Up front, in the serene bubble of first class, Brenda was pouring another glass of champagne for the passenger in 2B, Arthur Peterson. "See? Isn't this much better now?" she said with a triumphant little smile. "Everything in its right place." Arthur Peterson just stared at her. He had seen Marcus Thorne take out his phone. He had a sickening feeling in the pit of his stomach. He took the champagne, but it tasted like ash in his mouth. He knew with absolute certainty that everything was about to go very, very wrong. The call connected on the second ring. The audio was crystal clear, a marvel of the satellite technology that bypassed the plane's consumer-grade Wi-Fi. "Cynthia," Marcus said, his voice low and devoid of emotion. He was cupping the phone, leaning forward slightly to create a cone of privacy. The engine's roar provided a blanket of white noise. "Marcus, is everything all right? I thought you'd be in the air," came the crisp professional voice of his top lawyer. Cynthia Rowe was a legend in corporate law, a woman who could dissect a 10,000-page contract and find the single misplaced comma that would save a client millions. "I am in the air," Marcus replied. "I'm calling about Project Nightingale. I want you to kill it." There was a dead silence on the other end of the line. For a full 3 seconds, the only sound was the faint hiss of the satellite connection. Cynthia Rowe was not a woman easily shocked, but this was the equivalent of a pilot asking to scuttle his own aircraft carrier. "Kill it?" she finally repeated, her voice tight. "Marcus, the signing is at 10 a.m. tomorrow. Robert Maxwell has a press conference scheduled. The markets are expecting this." "What happened?" Marcus took a slow breath. He could picture Cynthia in her office, already pulling up the files, her mind racing through the penalty clauses, the exit strategies, the potential fallout. "We're invoking Clause 17, Section B," he said calmly, "the Partner Conduct and Brand Integrity Clause." Cynthia was silent again, but he knew she was mentally reciting the text. It was a clause she herself had drafted, a piece of legal armor she insisted on including in all major partnership agreements. It stated that if the partner or any of its representatives engaged in conduct that brought disrepute, embarrassment, or harm to the Nexus brand or its key personnel, Nexus had the right to terminate the agreement immediately without penalty. It was generally considered a boilerplate, a catch-all for hypothetical PR disasters. No one ever expected it to be used. "My God, Marcus," Cynthia whispered. "What did they do?" This was the part where he could have raged. He could have detailed the sneering looks, the condescending tone, the public humiliation. But that wasn't his style. Emotion was a liability in a negotiation, and this was the final negotiation. "Let's just say AeroVista's premier customer service failed to meet the minimum standards of professional decency," he said, the words precise and cold. "Their representatives made a decision today that has convinced me that their corporate culture is fundamentally incompatible with ours. They are not a partner we can trust with our brand or our future. Their conduct was not just unprofessional, it was bigoted." He didn't need to say more. The word bigoted was a nuclear bomb in the world of corporate partnerships. "I understand," Cynthia said, her voice now hard as steel. She was no longer a shocked colleague. She was a legal weapon being aimed. "Are you certain? The financial implications—" "I've considered them," Marcus cut in. "The cost of associating with a company that tolerates this kind of behavior in its ranks is far higher than any termination fee. This isn't about money, Cynthia. It's about the principle. A partner who can't distinguish a CEO from a trespasser based on the color of his skin is a partner whose judgment cannot be trusted in anything. Period." He paused, letting the finality of his statement sink in. "Draft the termination notice. Make it effective immediately. Send a copy to Robert Maxwell's personal email and his general counsel. And I want you to leak the why to our contact at the Wall Street Journal. The official reason is a fundamental breach of the brand integrity clause following an incident of discriminatory behavior by airline staff. Be discreet, but be clear. I want the story breaking as we land." "It will be done, Marcus," Cynthia said. "Consider the deal dead. And Marcus, I'm sorry you had to experience that." "Just handle it, Cynthia," he said, and ended the call. The entire conversation had taken less than 5 minutes. He slipped the phone back into his pocket. The college student beside him shot him a curious glance, having noticed the intensity of the brief, quiet call. Marcus simply gave her a slight nod and stared ahead at the back of the seat in front of him. He had just vaporized a $200 million deal. He had set in motion a chain of events that would detonate in the stock market, costing AeroVista hundreds of millions more in shareholder value. He had done it all from a cramped middle seat in row 34, while the architects of the disaster were up front, blissfully unaware, topping up champagne. 5 minutes. That's all it took. The time it takes to brew a cup of coffee, The time it takes to listen to a pop song, the time it takes for a global airline to lose $500 million because two of its employees couldn't see past their own prejudice. The karmic bomb was now ticking, and touchdown in San Francisco was the detonator. Up in the flight deck of the Boeing 787, Captain Frank Miller was running through his post-ascent checks. He was a veteran pilot, a man with 30 years of experience, and a calm demeanor that had seen him through everything from engine failures to medical emergencies. For him, Flight 815 was a routine milk run, a simple, straight shot across the country. The calm was shattered by a chime from the aircraft's communication system. It wasn't a standard radio call. It was an ACARES message, a text-based message sent directly from the airline's Central Operations Center in Dallas. These were usually reserved for critical updates, severe weather reroutes, airport closures, or VIP notifications. He glanced at the screen. The message was flagged urgent. MSG from Aviops Dallas to Capt F. Miller, FLT 815. Subject critical Nightingale, confirm immediate. Is Marcus Thorne, CEO Nexus Innovations on board? Manifest shows seat 2A, CEO Maxwell trying to reach him. Urgent. Nightingale. Partnership is compromised. Repeat. Nightingale compromised. Captain Miller felt a jolt, as if the plane had hit a pocket of severe unforecasted turbulence. Nightingale compromised. He knew all about Project Nightingale. Every pilot and executive at Aerovista did. It was the company's golden ticket, the tech upgrade that was supposed to launch them past their rivals. "John, look at this," he said to his first officer, his voice tight. The first officer read the message and his eyes went wide. "Marcus Thorne, he's on this flight? In 2A? "That's what it says," Miller grunted. He keyed the intercom to the cabin. "This is the captain. Could the lead purser please report to the flight deck immediately?" A moment later, the door opened, and a senior flight attendant named David, the cabin's overall manager, stepped in. David was a consummate professional who usually handled the business class section, leaving first class to Brenda's seniority. "Captain, what is it?" "David, I need you to do something for me. And I need you to be quiet and fast," Miller said, his eyes locked on the purser. "I need you to go to seat 2A and confirm if Marcus Thorne is in that seat, CEO of Nexus Innovations. Tall black man, probably in a suit. According to this," he gestured to the screen, "our entire Nightingale deal is going up in flames, and he's at the center of it." David's face paled. "Marcus Thorne? Captain, I saw him board. He was supposed to be in 2A. "Supposed to be? What does that mean?" Miller demanded. "Brenda and Susan handled him," David said, a look of dawning horror on his face. "There was some kind of issue with his seat. I was busy with the main cabin boarding. I didn't get the details." "Find out the details, David," Captain Miller snapped, his voice a low growl. "Where is he right now? Go! Now!" David practically ran from the cockpit. He strode into the first-class galley, where Brenda and Susan were chatting, laughing about something. "Brenda," David said, his voice sharp, "the passenger for 2A, the black gentleman. Where is he?" Brenda's smile vanished. "He's where he belongs. There was a mix-up with his ticket. He's in economy, seat 34B. She said it with a note of pride, as if she'd just averted a crisis. David stared at her as if she had just confessed to setting fire to the plane. He felt the blood drain from his face. He knew Brenda's attitude, her little power plays, but he never imagined she could be so catastrophically stupid. "Brenda, do you have any idea what you've just done?" he whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and fear. "That was Marcus Thorne, the CEO of Nexus Innovations." Susan's hand flew to her mouth. Brenda, however, held her ground, though a flicker of uncertainty finally appeared in her eyes. "I don't care who he is. His past was flagged in our system. I was following procedure." "There was no flag, Brenda," David hissed, his voice dangerously low. "The captain just got a message from Dallas. Our $500 million Nightingale deal with Nexus has been compromised. Robert Maxwell himself is trying to find out what the hell is going on. You didn't just move a passenger, you just detonated a bomb under this entire company." The color drained from Brenda's face. The rigid helmet of hair suddenly seemed less imposing, more like a fragile shell. "No, that can't be right. It was a ticketing error." There was no error, David shot back. The only error was your prejudice. Now the captain wants to see both of you. In the cockpit, immediately. The short walk to the flight deck was the longest of Brenda's and Susan's lives. When they entered, Captain Miller swiveled his chair around. He didn't yell. His voice was cold, flat, and utterly terrifying. I have one question for you two, he said, pinning them with a glare. You took a man, a partner of this airline, whose deal is worth more than this entire aircraft, and you humiliated him and sent him to a middle seat in the back of the bus. I want you to tell me exactly why you did that. Brenda opened her mouth, the pathetic lies about ticketing errors and system glitches dying on her lips. She looked at the captain's stony face, at the blinking red urgent message on the screen, and for the first time, the full, crushing weight of her actions hit her. She had no answer. There was no corporate policy, no rule, no procedure that could justify what she had done. There was only her own ugly, baseless assumption. That's what I thought, Captain Miller said, his voice laced with contempt. He turned to David. Go back there. Find Mr. Thorne. Apologize on behalf of the flight crew. Offer him anything he wants. My seat, the jump seat, anything. Tell him I will be personally waiting to escort him off the plane in San Francisco to meet with our ground staff, and that we are indescribably sorry. David nodded and hurried out. Miller turned back to the two women who were standing frozen in the small space. As for you two, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, you will go back to the galley. You will not speak to another passenger for the remainder of this flight. You will not serve another drink. When we land, you will remain on this aircraft until you are met by airline security and management. You have disgraced this uniform. You have disgraced this airline. And I have a feeling you are about to find out just how much this little power trip of yours has cost you. Brenda and Susan stumbled back into the galley, their faces ashen. The bubble of first class no longer felt serene. It felt like a crime scene, and they were the culprits. Meanwhile, David made the long walk to row 34. He saw Marcus Thorne sitting calmly, reading a file in his lap as if he were in his own office. The sight of this powerful man, crammed into the worst seat on the plane by the petty actions of his own crew, filled David with a profound sense of shame. He knelt in the aisle, a gesture of supplication. Mr. Thorne, he said, his voice low, my name is David. I'm the cabin purser. Sir, there are no words to express how sorry we are. Marcus looked up from his file, his expression unreadable. It's a little late for apologies, David. The decision has been made. Sir, please, David pleaded. We can move you back to your seat, anywhere you like. Captain Miller sends his deepest regrets. Marcus Thorne looked at the earnest, horrified face of the purser. He then glanced at the elderly woman beside him, who was watching with wide eyes, and the college student who had taken her headphones off. He shook his head, a gesture not of anger, but of finality. Thank you, David, but no, he said, his voice still quiet. But now it carried the weight of absolute authority. I'm quite comfortable here. I wouldn't want to cause any more confusion. He turned his attention back to his file, a clear dismissal. The message was unmistakable. The damage was done. The consequences were already in motion, and there was nothing anyone on that plane could do to stop them. The descent into San Francisco was smooth from a meteorological standpoint, but inside the cabin of Flight 815, the tension was thick enough to be a weather event in its own right. In first class, the silence was funereal. In the galley, Brenda and Susan sat on jump seats, pale and mute, awaiting their fate. In economy, Marcus Thorne calmly packed his briefcase, exchanging a polite farewell with the elderly woman and the college student. As the plane taxied toward the gate, Marcus noticed they weren't heading for the usual terminal. Instead, they were being guided by ground vehicles to a remote stand, an isolated section of the tarmac far from the public eye. He knew what this meant. A welcoming committee was waiting. The moment the plane came to a final stop, the seatbelt sign was extinguished, but an announcement immediately followed, not from the cabin crew, but from Captain Miller himself. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain speaking. We have arrived in San Francisco. However, due to a special ground operation, we ask that all passengers please remain seated until further notice. I repeat, All passengers, please remain seated. A murmur of confusion and annoyance went through the cabin. But Marcus knew this message wasn't for all passengers. It was for one. Seconds later, the main cabin door opened and two figures appeared. One was Captain Miller, his face grim. The other was a man in a sharp suit whose face Marcus recognized instantly from industry galas and financial news reports. Robert Maxwell, the CEO of Aerovista Airlines. His face was a mask of controlled panic. He wasn't looking at the first-class passengers. His eyes scanned the entire length of the aircraft, searching. Captain Miller pointed subtly toward the back. Robert Maxwell's gaze followed, and he saw him. He saw the multi-billionaire titan of industry, the man who held his company's future in his hands, standing up from a middle seat in row 34. The sight seemed to physically wound him. He straightened his tie and began the long, humiliating walk down the aisle, past the bewildered faces of the economy passengers. It was the reverse of Marcus's earlier journey, a pilgrimage of apology. He stopped in the narrow aisle beside Marcus's row. The college student and the elderly woman stared, utterly starstruck. "Marcus," Robert Maxwell began, his voice strained. "Marcus, I just landed myself. I came straight here. I don't know what to say." Marcus looked at him, his expression cool and analytical. "There's nothing to say, Robert. Your staff was very clear about your company's policies." "This is not our policy," Maxwell insisted, his voice a hoarse whisper. "This is an unforgivable, catastrophic failure of judgment by two individuals. Individuals who, I assure you, will no longer be employed by this airline as of this moment." From the front galley, Brenda and Susan heard this. Brenda flinched as if struck. Susan began to quietly cry. "This goes beyond two employees, Robert," Marcus said, picking up his briefcase. "This is about a culture where employees feel empowered to make judgments based on appearance, not on facts. A culture where bias is allowed to masquerade as procedure. That's a rot that starts at the top. Today, I wasn't a CEO. I wasn't a platinum-tier client spending millions with you. I was just a black man who, in their eyes, didn't belong. What if I hadn't been me? What if I was just a regular passenger, a lawyer, a doctor, a tourist who had saved up for a first-class seat?" He would have had no recourse. He would have just been humiliated. That's the part that I cannot and will not forgive. He stepped out into the aisle, forcing the CEO of Aerovista to step back. "Marcus, please," Robert pleaded, desperation creeping into his voice. He was no longer a powerful CEO, he was a beggar. "The deal, Project Nightingale. We can fix this. I will personally oversee a company-wide retraining. We'll issue a public apology. Name your terms. Anything." Marcus paused at the head of the aisle, near the open door. He looked back at Robert, then gestured around the cabin. "The terms were simple, Robert. Dignity, respect. The basic premise that a customer is a customer. Your company failed that test in the most spectacular way possible. My legal team has already sent the termination notice. It is final. We will be taking Project Nightingale to your competitor. I believe Omnisky Airlines will be very interested to hear what's suddenly become available." The mention of their biggest rival was a dagger to Robert Maxwell's heart. He visibly deflated. The last ounce of hope drained from his face. He knew it was over. "Now," Marcus said, his voice crisp, "if you'll excuse me, I have a car waiting." He stepped out of the aircraft and onto the mobile stairs that had been brought to the plane. At the bottom of the stairs, a black Cadillac Escalade was waiting, its engine humming. As he descended, he saw two uniformed security officers waiting by the cockpit crew. They were there for Brenda and Susan. Marcus didn't look back. He got into the waiting car, and the door was closed behind him. As the car pulled away from the lonely aircraft on the tarmac, he glanced at his phone. The first alerts were already coming in. Bloomberg, Aerovista Airlines, AVR, plummets in after hours. Trading amid rumors of canceled tech partnership with Nexus Innovations. Wall Street Journal, sources report Nexus CEO Marcus Thorne terminated a $500 million deal with Aerovista mid-flight, citing discriminatory incident by airline staff. The stock price, which had been climbing all week in anticipation of the Nightingale announcement, was now in a nosedive. The initial $200 million loss from the contract was just the beginning. The market's reaction to the instability, the scandal, and the loss of the game-changing technology would be far, far worse. By the time the markets opened in the morning, the number would be closer to $500 million in lost shareholder value. 5 minutes for the phone call, 6 hours in the air, a lifetime of consequences. The karma had landed. The aftermath of Flight 815 was not a quiet reckoning. It was a public execution played out in the unforgiving arenas of Wall Street and social media. The story, seeded with surgical precision by Cynthia Rowe to a trusted contact at the Wall Street Journal, erupted into the zeitgeist just as the Monday morning trading bells rang across the nation. It was, for Aerovista Airlines, a perfect storm. The bleeding began in pre-market trading. Traders arriving at their desks saw the ticker symbol AVR glowing a venomous red. The alert from Bloomberg was stark. Aerovista Airlines, AVR, in pre-market freefall, following abrupt cancellation of Nexus Innovations tech deal. The initial drop was 12%. When the market opened at 9:30 a.m. Est, it was a bloodbath. Sell orders cascaded in, an avalanche of panicked investors trying to dump the stock. The company's name flashed across every financial news channel, not as a pioneer of a new era of tech, but as a symbol of catastrophic corporate failure. By noon, the stock had plummeted by 18%, a staggering loss that vaporized over $650 million in shareholder value. The $200 million Nightingale contract was the wound, but the ensuing brand damage was the infection that threatened to consume the entire organism. An industry analyst appearing on CNBC laid out the damage in chillingly simple terms. "This is far more than a lost contract," she explained, her face grim. Aerovista didn't just lose a software deal, they lost the future. They handed Project Nightingale, the single most important innovation in aviation logistics in a generation, directly to their arch-rival, Omnisky Airlines. They have publicly demonstrated a cultural rot that now makes them a toxic brand for premium customers and corporate partners alike. This isn't a one-quarter problem. This is a reputational hole that could take them a decade to climb out of, if they ever can. Robert Maxwell, the CEO, was forced to call an emergency press conference. He stood at a podium, looking haggard and defeated, the crisp suit he wore on the tarmac now appearing like a costume on a broken man. "On behalf of every single employee at Aerovista Airlines, I want to offer our most profound and humble apology to Mr. Marcus Thorne," he began, reading stiffly from a teleprompter. "The actions of two individuals on Flight 815 were an abhorrent and unacceptable violation of our values." The apology was rejected by the court of public opinion before he even finished speaking. It was seen as a desperate, self-serving attempt to stop the financial hemorrhaging, lacking any genuine remorse. The phrase "two individuals" was singled out as a cowardly attempt to deflect from the systemic cultural issue Marcus had so pointedly identified. The press conference ended, and the stock slid another 2 points. Brenda's professional demise was swift and brutal. She was met not by airline management, but by a stern-faced HR executive and 2 security guards as she was finally allowed to deplane. In a sterile, windowless office in the airport's administrative wing, she was officially terminated for gross misconduct and a willful violation of corporate anti-discrimination policies, resulting in catastrophic financial and reputational damage to the company. Her ID badge was deactivated. Her company-provided health insurance would end at midnight. Her 20 years of service, her seniority, her impending pension, all gone, erased in an instant. She was handed a cardboard box containing the contents of her locker and escorted from the building like a common criminal. Her initial shock curdled into a potent, self-righteous fury. In her mind, she was the victim. She was a loyal employee who had been thrown under the bus to protect a weak CEO and appease a difficult, arrogant passenger. She vented to her family and few remaining friends, her narrative always the same. "I was just doing my job. The system flagged him. It wasn't about his race, it was about procedure." The lies grew more elaborate in her own mind, a fortress of denial to protect her from the devastating truth of her own prejudice. But the world outside her fortress was not so forgiving. Within 48 hours, her name and staff photo were leaked. She became Airline Karen, the subject of memes, TikTok parodies, and angry Reddit threads. Her personal information was shared on dark corners of the web. She was forced to delete her social media, but it was too late. She was infamous. A few months later, having exhausted her savings, she applied for a job as a guest services manager at an upscale hotel chain. She thought that perhaps in a different city, with a different uniform, she could start over. She made it to the final interview. The hiring manager, a sharp man in his 50s, reviewed her resume. He looked up, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Brenda Jensen," he said slowly, tapping his pen on her CV. "That name is familiar." He paused, then his eyes widened in recognition. "Oh my God, you're the one! From the Aero Vista flight." Brenda's blood ran cold. "That was a misunderstanding. It was taken completely out of context." She began to stammer. The manager held up a hand, his expression no longer curious, but cold as ice. "Ms. Jensen, let me be very clear. My job is to protect this hotel's brand. Our clientele includes celebrities, executives, and people from every background imaginable. Hiring you would be the equivalent of putting a lit match in a fireworks factory. It's an unacceptable risk. What you call a misunderstanding, the rest of the world calls a $500 million act of bigotry. We have nothing further to discuss." The interview was over. As Brenda walked out onto the street, the city noise fading into a dull roar in her ears, the full weight of her karma finally crushed her. It wasn't just the loss of a job. It was the loss of any future job. She was a pariah. The small, intoxicating power she had wielded in the first-class cabin had cost her everything, leaving her powerless in a world that would never let her forget what she had done. Susan's experience was a different kind of punishment. Fired with the same brutal efficiency as Brenda, her immediate reaction was not anger, but a deep, gut-wrenching shame. She replayed the incident over and over in her mind. Marcus Thorne's calm, patient face, Brenda's sneering condescension, and her own silent, cowardly complicity. She knew in her heart that Brenda was wrong, but she had been too scared of her senior colleague, too intimidated to challenge her. Her silence had been a form of consent. A week later, unable to eat or sleep properly, she sat down and wrote a letter. It was not a strategic ploy or a plea for her job back. It was a confession. With a trembling hand, she wrote not to the company, but directly to Marcus Thorne. She took full responsibility, explaining her fear, but not using it as an excuse. "My silence was a choice," she wrote, "and it was the wrong one. I failed my duty as a crew member, but more importantly, I failed as a human being. I saw a man being treated with profound disrespect, and I did nothing to stop it. The company can measure its loss in dollars, but I will have to measure my loss in the memory of my own cowardice for the rest of my life. I am deeply and truly sorry for the personal humiliation I helped cause." The letter, vetted by a lawyer to ensure it was purely an apology, found its way to Marcus's desk. He read it quietly in his minimalist office overlooking the San Francisco Bay. He saw no excuses, only raw, honest remorse. He called Cynthia Rowe. "Cynthia," he said, "the junior attendant from the flight, Susan. The media is still digging. Make sure her name stays buried. She made a mistake, a bad one, but she's not the source of the rot. Keep the focus where it belongs, on the leadership and the culture that let this happen." It was not forgiveness, but a strategic decision. Susan had to live with her actions, but Marcus saw no value in her public crucifixion. Her karma was internal, a private battle with her conscience. She was spared the public infamy, a small mercy that allowed her the chance to, one day, rebuild a life, forever marked by a lesson learned in the most painful way imaginable. Months passed. At a university library hundreds of miles away, Chloe, the young engineering student from seat 34A, was cramming for her midterm exams. The flight was a bizarre, distant memory. Then an email appeared in her inbox with the subject line, "Invitation, Nexus Innovations Summer Internship Program." She assumed it was a standard recruitment blast and almost deleted it. But she opened it. "Dear Ms. Miller," it read, "your academic profile was brought to the attention of our recruitment division by the office of our CEO, Marcus Thorne. Mr. Thorne was impressed by your focus and dedication under unusual circumstances and noted your field of study. We would like to formally invite you to apply for our paid summer internship program. Your application will be fast-tracked to the final interview stage. Chloe stared at the screen in utter disbelief. The quiet, powerful man from the middle seat, who had every reason to forget everything about that humiliating flight, had remembered her. He had taken the time to not only find out who she was, but to create an opportunity for her. It was a gesture that spoke volumes about his character. His power wasn't merely a destructive force used to punish his enemies. It was also a creative force, used to build something positive from the wreckage. For Marcus Thorne, true victory wasn't just about tearing down a corrupt culture. It was about building a better future, one brilliant young engineer at a time. It was the final, quiet, and most definitive statement in the entire affair. So what's the real takeaway here? Is it that you should be nice to people because they might be a secret millionaire? No, that's the cheap lesson. The real story is about the devastating cost of a prejudice that's so ingrained it feels like procedure. Brenda and Susan didn't think they were being hateful. They thought they were enforcing the rules of a world they understood, a world where a man like Marcus Thorne simply didn't fit into seat 2A. They were wrong. Their mistake wasn't a simple customer service slip-up. It was a failure of basic human decency, and the market delivered a verdict more brutal than any court of law. This story is a stark reminder that in our interconnected world, character, respect, and dignity aren't just soft skills, they are hard assets. And when a company devalues them, the bill always, eventually comes due. What did you think of this story of epic karma? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever witnessed something like this? Don't forget to hit that like button if you enjoyed it, share it with someone who needs to see it, and make sure you subscribe and ring that notification bell so you don't miss our next story.